Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 28, on being a priest and a druid, with our guest via Skype, the Reverend Mark Townsend. Hey Mark, welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Thank you, Gina. Great to be here.
So, I know you from your books, at least from Jesus Through Pagan Eyes. And I know a lot of my audience will probably know who you are, but for those who don't know who you are, can you introduce yourself and tell my audience a little bit about your path and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. Okay, lovely to be here. Thank you. My name is Mark Townsend. I'm an ex-Anglican vicar. I'm based in the UK on the Welsh border, and I was a priest or a vicar for about 13 years. And 7 years ago, I left for a period for 3 years to explore things, really. And at the end of that period, I decided to stay away, not stay away, but stay independent, because during those 3 years, I'd kind of become very influenced by paganism and Druidry in particular. So I kind of now see myself, I suppose, as someone who doesn't particularly wear labels. I'm still technically a Christian priest, but I have a much broader vision than, I suppose, a lot of clergy. So that's really me in a nutshell.
Mm-hmm. So what made you... So you were in the Episcopal Church. So what drew you towards Druidry? Because I know specifically that you are a Druid. So
yeah. I mean, various things. For years and years, as I said, I was an Anglican clergy person for 13 years, and probably throughout that I was very fascinated by all sorts of other perspectives, especially Eastern religions, but also pre-Christian traditions from my own brand, which would be the Druidry and what have you. But I never really had the freedom to go and explore that because of being an Anglican priest. And so when I left, I very quickly found myself invited to things. One of the things that will probably come out in this is that I'm a magician as well, as in a close-up and sleight-of-hand magician.
Oh, very cool.
And I've always used that as a way to awaken people to wonder. So when I left the Church of England, the Anglican Church, I kind of set myself up as a magician with a difference. And I found myself getting invited all over the place. And one of the first places I got invited was the convention of OBOD, the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, a very big Druid order. And the chief, Philip Cargom, invited me, and I just took to it like a duck to water. I loved it. It was such a refreshing experience. And I would say changed my life, because that night I knew that I had sort of part of me had come home. And so that was, I suppose, being plunged into the world of Druidry. And then that was 7 years ago. Then over the last 7 years, I've experienced all sorts of pagan expressions. And I guess I'm most comfortable with Druidry because it tends to be so all-embracing and accepting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So a lot of what people ask me, because I'm Wiccan Christian, and one of the things that people ask me the most is, how do you reconcile the two? And now, like knowing the history that I know, I can see where they come together.
Yeah.
But how did you come to that point of how they mesh for you?
Yeah, sure. And it's a very fair question. And it's a question I would myself have asked maybe 20 years ago. I would have been very confused if someone said they were a Christian pagan or a Christian Druid, a Christian Wiccan. In fact, I would have been confused if they had said they were a Christian Buddhist or a Christian... But for me, it's an ongoing exploration and journey, and I don't think I've harmonized everything yet. One of the reasons why I wrote that book, which you mentioned, Jesus Through Pagan Eyes, is partly because I wanted to ask myself, am I still a Christian? What does Jesus mean to me as someone who's now very comfortable in a pagan environment? And also, I've met you must have as well, I've met so many ex-Christian pagans who can't stand the church, and I guess we know why, but
Right.
they still have a deep respect for Jesus as a man, as a very courageous and authentic, a beautiful person. So I kind of wrote it a little bit for them as well, but mainly for my own exploring of the subject. And a lot happened during the writing of that book. In a sense, I probably fell back in love with Jesus for a start. Not as a kind of Jesus saves you sort of thing. So I'm not where that is.
Mm-hmm.
As a first century mystic, as a first century earthy, very down to earth, gritty person who loved people, clearly loved people, and who actually welcomed a certain amount of pagans, as in the Romans that he came across, because they were clearly pagan people, different to the sort that we're talking about.
Right.
But he said he said to one person, "I've never seen such great faith as I have in you," and that was a pagan.
Right.
He was a Jewish man, never became a Christian, obviously. He was a truly Jewish man, and that would have been massive for him to have said that. And sometimes in the story of Jesus, you can see him struggling, like the time when he meets the Syro-Phoenician woman who kind of asks for bread. And at first, he's very offensive to her, and she tests him. This is, of course, another pagan woman. And then at the end of the story, he completely changes his mind. So he's kind of struggling himself. So to me, Jesus is not God incarnate, literally. Jesus is a symbol of what it means to be God incarnate for all of us, to be sort of struggling with this dual personality, semi-divine, if you like. And what I love about the pagans that I know is they hold that together very well. They will often say, thou art God, thou art goddess, to each other. And I love that. And I think that's what true Christianity is about, owning our own deity, or our own, in biblical language, made in the image of God likeness. It's all there. And I'm just amazed and sometimes saddened by the way that the church has almost become exactly the antithesis of what I think Jesus certainly wanted to express to his own people, the Jewish people that he met. Does that make some sort of sense?
Absolutely. I know from my own experience, I've come across, I come across it on both sides. There's the Christians that are like, oh my God, you're doing what? And then, there's the pagans that basically have the same reaction, or, there's a few pagans that are kind of like, I've gone over to the enemy. And thankfully I have a really great community of friends here that are just really awesome. And, our own coven and groups are really very open and like, hey, you're great, going on your path. Awesome. But I know what you mean, because I know, at least for me, the first few months of realizing, hey, wait a minute, I hadn't really given up Jesus, have I? No. And that was like my first couple of months of seminary too. So it was kind of, a knock in the head.
Yeah. I've had what you said as well. It may be more from your side of the ocean, I have to say, in terms of people's reactions to my book. I'm not sure quite why that is, but there were quite a number of sort of on various pagan forums, quite a lot of American pagans who actually took one look at the title and just threw it away, and there's no way that this can be any use to us. And some were kind of expecting it to be something that it wasn't. Again, I sympathize with that, because there probably are Christians in the pagan world who are there as fishermen, who are probably there with an ulterior motive. But I'm not one of them, you're not one of them, and the people that I know who wear those two labels they're not interested in converting. They're interested in learning and exploring and expressing, and it's a shame that maybe those people didn't turn over at least the first page and read the introduction or even the preface, because they would have seen straight away that I'm not about converting people back to the church. In fact, probably closer to the opposite. I want church people to see that there's a bigger world out there, you know. Because the church, it does frustrate me. It's you know, it's a 2,000-year-old tradition, and yet it's so infantile in some ways. It's so, I don't know. Just it seems to be so fragile, and it's getting worse. In this country, it's getting worse. You know, they're going through questions that the rest of society have forgotten about. You know, the whole the gay issues and the women in ministry issues. You know, we're only just beginning to tackle that. And most of the, you know, even the armed forces, it's not an issue anymore. So, I mean,
Right.
it's just, I find it incredible. I really do. But whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I have hope. I mean, I have hope for Christianity as a whole moving forward, that, you know, they'll come around, because, you know, I see groups like, you know, I talk a lot about my church, City of Refuge, run by Bishop Yvette Flunder, and I mean, just her theology of inclusion and radical inclusion is just amazing. And I'm seeing more and more churches, especially by recent graduates that I've seen come through seminary, at least through here, that are really trying to bring about more, you know, a more inclusive Christianity that includes more interfaith and multi-faith people.
That's great to hear. And yes, it is happening here too. There's far more, at a grassroots level, there's far more going on than there has been. But sadly, at a kind of hierarchical level, there's probably, again, maybe psychologically an understandable knee-jerk reaction to what they fear to be a sinking ship, really. The thing is, you can't go backwards. You know, you can't patch up holes and go backwards. You have to go forwards. You can't disinvent things. And, you know, the two issues that really knocked it on the head for me in the end, and when I decided not to go back to the Church of England as a priest, the one was that I was doing a lot of same-sex relationship blessings, and of course I wouldn't be allowed to do that in this country as a clergy person. And the other was the attitude of the officialdom of the Church of England towards pagan people. You know, I can't. These are my sisters and my brothers in the spirit, and sometimes I feel far closer to them than, well, in fact, usually far closer than traditional Christians. I have got, and I thank God that I've got many very inclusive and progressive Christian friends. And I'm not one to hope that everybody believes the same thing. One of the reasons I still love Anglicanism is that it's a very broad tradition, and you know, you can be liberal, you can be Catholic, you can be evangelical, you can be a mixture of the three, you can be non-realist, you can be just about anything. And I love that variety, and I love the fact that we have different ways of expressing things within it. But I can't collude with labeling whole groups of people as somehow inferior just because of either their sexuality or the tradition that makes them whole.
Right.
So I'm happy to be out here on my own at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I ended up with my own thing, you know, because one thing we do definitely have in common is that we're both starting churches, and it's been interesting because, you know, the people kind of poke in the corners and like, what is that over there? I know you started Hedge Church, was it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hedge Church began as an internet, as a Facebook church. It's still a Facebook community.
Mm-hmm.
And a wonderful friend of mine called Elizabeth McNally, who's a Wiccan, and now someone who's, I suppose, happy to bring the Jesus rather than Christianity back into her life. We kind of founded it together, and I think it's got about 1,400 members now all over the world, and it's a wonderful community, a cyber community. Because of that, I also wanted to create a real community, a community that meets in a building. So for the last year, we've been using this a pub really in town, or a bar called Shooters, and every month we've met and we've had various themed services, stroke rituals, everything from Kate Bush, David Bowie style to Druid, celebrating the 8 festivals, that kind of stuff. It's kind of, it doesn't so much run out of steam as I think it's time to take it to a different part of the town. Partly because it's quite difficult to actually operate within a place that's also working as a pub. So Wayne and Debs, who've offered us the building, they've been so generous, and we're really grateful to them. But I think in the end we decided that it's better to try and find somewhere that we can just have as a church building. So I'm starting it again soon, it'll be an ongoing kind of an ongoing thing. I do miss the ministry, and I miss being an Anglican priest. I miss the people. I miss the blessing of children at the altar. I miss the visits. I miss the big events when people come into the church and Christmas and schools, and I really do miss all that. And I love the Church of England, and I love the Anglican tradition, and I sometimes get really sad if I go to visit a big cathedral, because I kind of feel it's still where I am, but I can't go back at the moment. It's just too much. Yeah.
Do you think the Anglican Church is moving forward? Because it seems recently, they've just reconciled about women and bishops being bishops, but I've also read recently that, and I don't know if this is just a area by area thing or bishop by bishop thing, but that some of the Anglican Church was really like, oh, paganism in the Anglican Church, okay, maybe that's okay. I don't know how much of that is really ubiquitous among the church or not.
It does depend. I mean, yes, the Church of England are about to consecrate the first woman bishop, which is wonderful.
Yay.
And today I heard that they're also about to consecrate a male bishop who's anti-women and who refuses to have any other bishop lay hands on him, who's also laid hands on a woman. So it's kind of 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. But there are loads and loads and loads of wonderful clergy, vicars throughout England and throughout Britain that I know, and I'm saying that now because we're talking about the Church of England. So throughout Britain and throughout England especially, who are doing wonderful things. There's Forest Church, which is a marvelous kind of Druidic style church. It's very much an Orthodox Christian church, but it's kind of going out into the fields, going out into the forests, and using rituals that are very close to how the Druidic communities would celebrate. And there's various other things happening. There's I think it's probably fair to say that there's more among the hierarchy in your country. There are much more radical bishops. There are radical in a positive sense. And then there's people like Matthew Fox and others who I know Roman Catholic that became Episcopalian, who for years has been doing wonderful things that cross those boundaries. But yeah, I love the Church of England. My son-in-law to be is training right now in my college, my seminary, and loving it. And I can't wait till he gets ordained, because he's going to be a wonderful breath of fresh air. And I support anybody who comes to me with wanting advice on becoming an Anglican priest. I always recommend that they go for it. I'm not one of these angry. One of the reasons why I left an English, an independent sacramental church, is that it was so negative towards the Church of England and so horrifically hostile. And I don't want to be part of something that's filled with angry old ex-vicars or angry people who, anger, that sort of venom doesn't help anybody. And as yet, I haven't felt able to join another, even though I value the independent movement. But yeah, I think it's really important to kind of, to bless our past, wherever it's led us, the good and the bad, because that's why we are who we are today. So many people seem to hold on with huge bitterness to things that have happened to them. It's not a good way, really.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, and I've seen that a lot in both sides of the tradition too, because there's a lot of anger and bitterness in pagan community towards Christianity, and the church that I go to is what my bishop calls Methodbapticostal. And and there's a lot of anger and bitterness there because the church I go to is very open and affirming and all that, and a lot of it's a primarily African American church, so a lot of the traditions that people have come from are very conservative and very anti-gay. But I tend to tell people, like, you can't really treat a whole of a tradition like a monolith, because there must have there are always some people that, even in the most conservative churches, there are always people that are going to be loving and caring and supportive of you, and you can't condemn them to something if you don't want them to condemn you. At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah. Look at the current Pope. I mean, he's a conservative Catholic bishop, and he's actually expressing something that we haven't seen in years from that position. Some people say, call him the liberal Pope or the progressive Pope, but he's not at all. He's incredibly orthodox in his faith, but his actions are beautiful. So I don't like labels. I think they confuse people, and they don't help when we categorize people, and put them in boxes. I was discussing with someone on my Facebook wall the other day who's very much a conservative Christian. He was going on about this awful thing that somebody's come up with 10. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's for sort of for marriages. 10 reasons. Or 10 things that a man should watch out for in a Christian woman, something like that. It's just
awful. I saw that yesterday.
Yeah, bloody awful. And he at the end said it's all about being true to Jesus. But I just pointed out to him that to be truly orthodox and to follow Jesus and to take his word for it means to be compassionate, to be loving, to be forgiving, to give second, third, fourth, 77th chances. And they've forgotten all of that. It's like. No, I mean, so I know lots of conservative Christians who are beautiful people because they take Jesus seriously. Others don't. Others put the church first. Or but one of the people that supported me the most publicly in the last few years, it was a Brethren minister who was absolutely fundamentalistic, but he was angry in the way that he supported me because he knew that Jesus is not about judgment, not about punishing, and it's funny, really. Funny how we can twist things, and I can be guilty of that too. That's the other thing. I think we always need to recognise that whenever we're feeling judgmental to someone, it's usually because we're guilty of it as well.
Oh, absolutely. I know there's times where I'm just kind of like, stop, stop the judgment, stop this, and you're being weird. And I know I go through all that myself, and and I have to check myself and be like, okay, well, why am I judging them? Why am I getting angry about this? What is happening with the human on the other end of this?
Yeah. So what about your church, the one you're planting, setting up, or have set up? Where is that, and how does that work?
So I am starting a church called Between the Worlds, and similarly, it's both online and in person. Although it just started last year, so no. in October 2013 around Samhain. And so I have both an in-person once a month service, and it's actually based at the church that I go to because they generously offered me space. They were really generous about the space.
Right.
Yeah, they're really fantastic. And so each month, we do different things. Like this past month, we did a drum circle for social justice and change to send out energy to social justice workers and for the movement and to encourage change, especially here after, Ferguson and all of that.
Mm.
And, the online component has been more of just advertising online, although we did do a really great Advent series with my deacons and I. We wrote some essays about what Christmas and Yule and Advent means to us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to do some more of that in the future, I hope. and it's gotten some really positive response, because it's more of I've tried to combine a lot of the Christian praxis that I like, especially Eucharist, but it actually has more of a Wiccan wrapper to it. So, we call the quarters and we do that, and we have some sort of working within in the ritual, but we always have a Eucharist. But we also try to be as radically inclusive as we possibly can. We in our welcome statement we say everybody is welcome regardless of age, sex, gender, sexuality, body size, all of that. And we also try to make sure that people that there's limited barriers to how people can get there. And the building is accessible. We have a gluten-free host because there's a lot of people I know, like including one of my deacons, that they're gluten-free folks. And we also don't have actual wine for the wine. We use juice because there's many people in the church that I go to and in my coven that are in recovery. So we try to make sure that we are able to basically limit the barriers to access.
Yeah, brilliant. That sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
Great.
It's been an interesting experience, and being the leader of a church has been a very somewhat lonely but really awesome experience.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's great. Really good to hear. Wonderful. And whereabouts are you based in the US? I'm not sure. Which state are you?
I'm in California.
Oh,
and
right.
Yeah, I live in San Jose, but our services are held in Oakland.
Right.
And it's been like I said, it's been a really interesting experience because people come and they're like, hey, wait a minute, this isn't quite so different from what I know.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've experienced that as well, but it's just like some people come and they're like, oh, wait, you do Eucharist, and oh, you do this, and wow, that's kind of cool.
It's I think people get pleasantly surprised by at the end. We're all very similar. I've had this heads church thing going, and a retired Anglican priest came for a couple of weeks and loved it, and he found it very comfortable, and I gave him the chalice to offer, and he loved it, and even though it was the one he came to was very Green Man orientated, but he loved it. I think all spiritual and religious language is essentially metaphorical. We plug in to different parts of the mosaic and make sense of it that way. And so I'm both monotheistic and polytheistic. I don't mind what language we use or what terms we use. Somehow it gets to the source. And I know again that's a massive bone of contention within the pagan community and the Christian community. That it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. The experience is there. The language works. I'm sure that God or the gods are not offendable. One of the things that my favourite theologian or spiritual teacher, Richard Rohr, says is, God is unoffendable. It's only the ego that gets offended, our ego. So he couldn't give a damn whether we call him God, Mother, Father, Goddess, whatever. And another thing that I love about the pagan traditions is that because of the kind of pluralistic or the polytheistic language, they have, for the big picture, they kind of, they express so much more than Christians do. We don't have a kind of a wild image of God. We don't. We have a very sanitized sort of, usually male picture of a great authority. We have Jesus as a sort of compassionate face of God, but we don't really have the Tenernos sort of the Pan type figure. The forest lustful kind of and I think it's all a projection of ourselves, and I think it's really essential. And we don't do darkness very well, and I don't mean evil. I mean proper darkness. We don't do the shadow very well. Again, Rohr always says that Paul was, Saint Paul had issues with the shadow, but Jesus didn't. He went out into the wilderness to face it. That's what that temptation sequence is about. And of course, pagans are very happy to recognize that they have a shadow and to express it, which is a way of taming it. So no wonder there's so much horror within Christian circles, because when you don't tame something and when you suppress it, it becomes very, very powerful, and every so often rears its ugly head. I think we can learn a huge amount from pagans. The funny thing with me, I thought in early days, I thought I was going to give up church altogether and just become a Druid, but I didn't. And I'm not quite sure why that is, because you can easily be a Druid who loves Jesus, like I am, but I am still a Christian. I'm quite happy to sort of. I'm actually writing a book at the moment about Druidry and Christianity, and this is going to be a chance for me to work out why I am where I am, really. But I kind of see Jesus. I came to this recently. I kind of see his mission as unfulfilled. It sounds really horrific to some people, but he wasn't supposed to die. I really believe that he died not because God put him on the cross, but because his own message was so threatening to the people around him, both Rome and Jerusalem, that he died. But when I talked earlier about the things that he was learning and expressing, and in his kind of change of heart towards Gentiles or pagans, that's all part of the learning curve. And I think that if he'd have lived longer, we would have had a bigger picture. But I think the beauty of the church is that it takes his message and runs with it. So we do need the church, but we don't need the church. Jesus wasn't a Christian, and we shouldn't make him into one, but we kind of need Christianity to take his message forward. The problem is that we've taken odd bits and maybe dodgy bits of the message, rather than like the progressive Christians are trying to do, rather than the actual man Jesus. I don't know if you've come across Robin Meyer's progressive Christian. Wonderful. I mean, his book, Saving Jesus from the Church, it's really worth getting. And it's one of those books that I underlined every single page. He's a progressive Christian pastor, and yet, unlike some, he's really practical. It's not just theory. His Jesus calls us to actually follow him and to wash the feet of the poor and everything else. So it's well worth getting, and that's how I see. That's why I think the church it's a double-edged sword. It's both Christ-like and anti-Christ. And again, that's a horrible thing to say, but I think it's true. It's true. Let's look back at the history, and let's look at the things today that are happening in various parts of the church. How can it not be anti-Christ? It's horrific what's going on, and yet also it's being Christ as well, in so many ways, and thankfully that's a bigger thrust. So that's kind of, in a way, why why I'm still where I am. I still love Jesus Christ. I absolutely, and I love the fact that we can somehow plug into His Spirit through the church and outside the church. But I'm quite happy to do it still as a minister of the church, a priest. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about how, Christianity is not a monolith. And I think people forget that, we're very human, and it's been dealt, and Christianity has been changed and evolving through the human lens. So, of course, we're going to have the progressive Christians, and we're going to have, fundamentalist Christians, and we're going to have Orthodox, and we're going to have Roman Catholic, and I think that's what a lot of people tend to forget. But I think you're also right. We have this dichotomy in Christianity that, people can be very Christ-like in helping the poor and doing that work, that kind of work, and being really caring and loving. And yet then there's the Antichrist thing, which I agree with you on, and, which you see a lot here, more so elsewhere than the Bay Area, but even here, even in the Bay Area, which is kind of a progressive bubble, you still get the people that are like, when they encounter me, like, oh, magic is of the devil, or, gay people are of the devil, or, trans people are of the devil. And it's just kind of, and yet, these are the same people that will be sitting in the food pantry giving out food to the homeless. So it's kind of a strange dichotomy that we're living in.
Yeah, it's strange. It's very strange. It's I forget who the quote was now. There's another Roman Catholic priest who maybe 4 or 5 decades ago he said something that I can't remember how he said it, but it was basically, if you want to find out what Jesus stood for, look at the church and reverse it. And it's really cynical. But he had a right to say that. He's a Dominican Roman Catholic priest. He had a right to say that, and in a way, I don't have that right anymore because I'm not part of the established church. But we all know what he means by that. And yet, I still hold on to the fact that there's far more good than bad, and it's in us anyway. The Antichrist and the Christ is within each one of us. That sort of language, of course, my pagan friends wouldn't like. But I think we do have the capacity to be pretty horrible, as human beings. And it's not that we're fallen and we need saving. It's none of that. It's nothing to do with original sin. But we do have a capacity to be selfish. And maybe that's why I get turned on by a lot of the Eastern traditions that are perhaps much more aware of the self and the ego and the need to develop a kind of selfless spirit. I'm a long way from that. But,
I think maybe that's more of what sin is, because I wrestle a lot with the ideas of sin and salvation, and I'm still really working on it, and I don't really have good answers that kind of are kind of the soundbite answers that people ask me when they're like, well, how does Wicca deal with sin and salvation? I was just like, well, they don't really, but I haven't really thought about it yet. So let me get back to you. But I think at least as far as sin goes, I think maybe you've hit on it, where it's that part of us that is the selfish part, that is the, that can be the darker part of ourselves that doesn't act appropriately, not necessarily the dark side of things where you were talking about earlier about, dealing with death and the other side and all of that. But more of the old Hebrew definition of it, where you're missing the mark,
Yeah. And actually, it's very healthy to get to the point where we weep over our brokenness, and it can be ever so healing. And it's not, we're not weeping over it because God is judging us. We're judging ourselves. But my favourite passage probably in the entire world, but certainly in the Bible, is the prodigal son, or the two lost sons, as I'd like to call it. But that point at the end where he falls into his father's arms and weeps because he is ashamed, and he that's the point where he breaks. You know, the evangelical tradition would say he turns out in the with the pigs, you know, when he's feeding the pigs. That's when he converts, but he doesn't. He's still deciding what to say all the way home. You know, he hasn't made up his mind yet. But that's when he melts into his father's arms, and there's no cross in that story. You know, there's pain in the father. That's probably where the cross is. But there's no sacrifice. There's no he gains redemption just by recognizing that he's loved. And you know, and Jesus told that story. So it's like this is the gospel. You know, I think it's a wonderful thing to know, to sort of feel that shame, and then the liberation of knowing that it's okay, you've dealt with it. But I don't think we do deal with it when we say, I've done this wrong, Jesus has paid the price, thank you very much. That's not dealing with it. And so sorry, you know, church, but that doesn't help. That kind of salvation message. Okay, sometimes it does. There's a breaking of the heart and a recognition, but very often it's just lip service, you know. And I think it's not in any other tradition. It's not even in Judaism. You know, that kind of idea of sacrifice is not what Judaism teaches about sacrifice. And in the original pagan sacrificial religions, it wasn't about letting us off the hook, you know, or dealing with our sin. It was a totally different concept. For some strange reason, it's a purely Christian thing, and I really don't think it helps. And I think Jesus would be absolutely appalled by it. Really do. I think, you know, and what we've made of the Eucharist, it's a beautiful, mystical, you know, symbolic meal which we don't fully understand, but it's something precious and priceless. But it's not about eating flesh and blood. You know, Jesus couldn't possibly have meant that. He was a Jew, for God's sake. You know, you can't eat blood. It's like, you know, it's the biggest taboo possible. You can't even eat animal blood, let alone human. It's you know, so he couldn't possibly literally meant you know, transubstantiation or whatever we call it. No way. But it's a mystical sharing in his body. It's just a totally different thing. And maybe that's the problem with literalism. You know, because certain mysteries are hard to understand, we tend to literalize and make them you know, understandable. But I don't think we can with some things. Yeah. Same with Trinity. It's like I'm quite happy to say I'm Trinitarian, but I don't really know what it means. I know what it feels like to be. It's, you know, God is immanent, God is transcendent, God is God-est too, God is relationship, you know. But you can't really pick up a clover or 3 magic rings and do some, you know, picture of it. It doesn't work that way. It's a paradox. Yeah. So a lot to learn from pagans, a heck of a lot. Pagan ritual as well, I think, is so much more dynamic and refreshing. And yet I have been, my only time I came to the USA was to New Mexico, and I stayed with Richard Raw's community and went up to Albuquerque, not 50 miles north of Albuquerque, and a place called Ghost Ranch, and did a wonderful vision quest.
Oh, very cool.
And the rituals there, it was Christian, but within the context of a sort of native American setting. But the rituals were like breathtaking, so powerful, so kind of earthy and passionate and gritty, and you know, absolutely wonderful. To come back to England to the sanitized sort of, you know, way of doing things was quite a shock to the system after that.
I bet. Yeah, I've been to that area of the country myself, and I stayed with some radical fairies for a week.
Right.
It was one of my very first vacations when I got out of college, and it's an amazing place, and it's just not quite like any other place that I've been to. So
amazing landscape, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My wife and I traveled through the desert actually a few months ago, because my wife is a rocket scientist who worked for NASA, and she was doing some field testing. Yeah, I totally scored. And we were driving through the desert, and we were just amazed, looking at the Joshua trees and just the open and barrenness of it. It's quite an amazing area.
Lovely.
And very spiritual area too. You just, it makes you think about the big picture and about, where you are and how much you can be a little speck in the universe.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to go back to the ritual aspect of paganism, because there was one thing that I brought up a lot during my seminary time, and which I kind of saw when especially, knowing some of the Western esoteric history that I do. And, there's a part of me, at least in the realm of Protestantism, that thinks that paganism kind of held on to the mysticism that it pushed out.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it really interesting that, there's a lot of Protestant Christians that are coming to be like, wow, mysticism. Wow, this is so amazing. Wow. And like, they've never had it before. I'm like, well, Christianity has this whole history of mysticism.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a kind of personal journey for me as well. And a lot of, I think you have the Wild Goose Festival over there somewhere. Here we have the Greenbelt Festival, and there's a lot of, it's essentially an evangelical or an open evangelical festival, and yet it's so eclectic and broad, and so the evangelicals have been introduced through that for years, for 20 odd, 30 odd years to candles and incense, and to ritual and ceremony of the Catholic tradition. And for me, I spent 4 months in Israel when I was about 18 as a Pentecostal, and what completely transformed me in Israel was not so much the sacred places of Galilee and beautiful, but the Sea of Galilee, and it was actually the shrines and the temples and the ancient Orthodox and Catholic churches that they amazed me, and I'd never really cottoned on to how powerful that sense of mystery and mysticism are. And you're absolutely right. I think there are, when I went to Glastonbury and did this thing with the Obod Druids, there was about 300 of them there, and I stood on the stage and I had a bit of a joke about me being a vicar and blah blah blah. And I just said to them, just as a matter of interest, how many of you have had a Christian background? And nearly all of them put their hand up. And then I said, and how many of those are Catholic? And most of them were. So there's a kind of, there's a lot of Catholics within paganism, because Catholicism itself is a magical, ritualistic tradition. And I think the Protestants who come in, like you say, are bowled over by this wonderful world of mystery and magic, and I think it's maybe something really archetypal within us. Because another thing that happened, of course, with Protestantism and Catholicism is the whole need for a mother goddess, and of course Catholics had that in Mary, and I know it's not ideal, but they had this kind of goddess figure, and yet the Protestants didn't. So there's been a kind of a motherless church really for Protestantism, and I mean you can see that in when I did a bit of psychology. The fact was that a lot of Protestant countries had I think it's a higher suicide rate generally than Catholic. And part of that is because of the practice of confession and sharing the sins, if you like, and that it's actually quite a healthy thing to do to a certain degree. And the other is, it was to do with this need for a mother figure, this feeling of being somehow embraced by, not by the mother church, but by actually Mother God. And so it's quite interesting. And this is just me tossing out ideas, really, because as I say, I'm still very new on this dual path, and my next book will give me a chance to really explore it. But I think there's something in that, I really do.
I think you're right. I mean, and I'm wondering if, and I'll ask you the same question. I'm wondering if this multipath thing is the future of spirituality for us as a human race, because, with the advent of the internet, people can really learn about this now.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if this is what's going to save, because people really talk about, the decline of the Catholic Church, the decline of Christianity and Christian churches. And I'm wondering if this is the evolution that might save the Christian tradition, which is a really strange thing to think about, but I'm wondering if that's where it's going.
Hard to know, isn't it? I mean, I think the church is so solid that maybe religions will stay, but I think maybe they'll get gradually more open and more able to share and to recognise that we're kind of struggling towards the same end. I think we're a hell of a long way away from that, but it is happening clearly in a small way in the grassroots and with all the stuff we've been talking about, which is really exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe also becoming more open and becoming more open to people of other traditions in general, that interfaith work that we really try to do, but not always succeed in doing. I think that's also the important part, because, we have so much, even we see today, between Islam and Christianity, there's a lot of hate towards the other. And I'm wondering maybe that's more of what I was thinking about, maybe being that open will help mitigate that hate and anger.
I hope so. Again, at the college I went to and that my son-in-law to be is at, we have a whole sort of session really, or a whole, what do you call it, quite a few months on the whole interfaith issue, and we go to Leicester is the place in England where there's a huge amount of lots of different faiths in a lot of people from, especially the Hindu tradition, and I spent some time there, and we visited temples and gurdwaras and mosques, and it was fabulous, absolutely wonderful, and I wish more colleges of all religions would do that, and schools as well. I really wish they would. It's so beneficial just to recognise that we're people, we're the same, and we have this way of communicating with the divine, and they have that, and it's, I don't know, I'd love to think that's true. I would love to think that there's going to be a breakdown of barriers, but sadly I think it's quite a long way off.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, well, thank you very much for joining us. We're sadly out of time. If people would like to get in touch with you to talk to you about your books or to ask questions, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
My main website is magicofsoul.com. We didn't talk about the magic so much, but it's magicofsoul.com. Mm-hmm. And on there are all my other websites, which all have contact pages. So, yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Awesome. Thank you. It's been great talking. Really good.
It's been great talking to you too. And we'll put all of that in the show notes. And I'll also list your books in the show notes as well, because I know Jesus Through Pagan Eyes has actually opened a lot of my friends' eyes. Like, oh, this is really cool. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Cheers.
I'd like to thank Mark for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, joining our forums, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.